Welcome to the SIGIC seminar. This is Beth Rugg from Ithaca College, the Professional Development Coordinator. Dan and I are just having a little bit of technical trouble, so I'm going to just ask your patience while we try to do some troubleshooting. Dan, I'm going to unmute your mic, and are you able to go ahead and speak?
Yes.
Okay, Dan, so then what I suggest is if you can just give me cues, and I will run the presentation for you from my computer.
Okay, I did go ahead and change one slide, so I can resend that to you really quick.
Sure. Go ahead and do that. The problem we're having, folks, for anybody who's on the line, is that Dan, for some reason, isn't able to come in as a panelist. He's in as an attendee, so that limits my ability to allow him to show his screen. So we're just doing some quick adjustments here, so just give me a moment. And I hope you enjoy the fish that are on my backdrop.
Beth, would you like to try the updated link you sent?
Let's just go with this because I just don't know how I don't want to take any more time than is needed. Does that work for you?
That's fair.
Alrighty, great. So Dan, I think everyone can see your title screen at this point. Can you see that as well, I hope?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So welcome, everyone. Sorry about some of those technical glitches. Sometimes that just happens with technology. I'm sure we're all aware of that. Just a few rules of the road before we get started. By default, everyone is muted, and that's mainly to help to manage conversation and to make sure people are not talking over each other. But I will go ahead and unmute you if you have a question, and I will know that if you can go ahead and raise your hand. So would everyone mind just practicing raising your hand so that I can see that you know where that tool is? Great, thank you. Carl, are you paying attention? I can pick on people that I know. All right, super. So you see how the hand raising feature works. If you can go ahead and unraise your hand, that will be great. If you have a question while Dan is presenting, if you can go ahead and raise your hand, Dan will see. Dan, do you see that now as a attendee, not a panelist?
I do.
Okay, super. So Dan will see that you have a question raised. That you have your hand raised, and he'll be able to
I take that back. I see that I've raised my own hand, but I don't see that anybody else has raised a hand.
All right, great. Not a problem. I can help facilitate with that. So, okay, so raise your hand if you have a question. I'll unmute you, and then you'll be able to speak and ask your question. If for some reason that doesn't work, then you should all have a question pod as part of GoToWebinar. So go ahead and you can just type in your question, and I can also read that to Dan as well. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. So Dan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you all for coming virtually to our webinar today. I'm going to talk about computer labs and the evolving roles of those nice facilities that we all use and love. So go ahead and next slide. So this is just a quick roadmap of what we're going to go through today. I am going to talk a little bit of theory. So if you're going to take a nap, that's the time to do it. That'll be the first part of it. And but please do, like Beth said, raise your hand if you have any questions. I will take questions at any point throughout there. There's a couple of points that I will stop and ask for questions as well. Next slide.
Can I just ask, I see that Steve Rawl has his hand raised. Steve, do you have a question now?
No.
Do you have a question? Okay, great. I'll just go ahead and thank you, Steve. Okay, there you go, Dan.
Great, and this is the slide that I changed, so ignore the word from our sponsor thing. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of who I am, where I'm coming from. So I'm at Colorado State University. We have about 26,000 students, and I actually represent just the College of Engineering, which we have a pretty intensive computing program here and infrastructure. Which is pretty representative of some small colleges. So we have about, it's changed now, we have closer to 2,500 students, about 114 faculty. The labs, computer labs, we have about 20 with about 400 seats throughout them. And I say 20-ish because depending on the way you count, and you'll get into that, that's how we count them. You can read the full paper if you like on the ACM Digital Library. Next slide. So let's talk about computer labs. This is a very, very simple definition of computer labs. Beth, you're going to have to press advanced twice here.
Twice?
Yep. So this is the simplest definition you can possibly come from. I did some searching, and Wikipedia had this very bare bones definition. This is a room which contains many network computers for public use. That's a computer lab. Next slide. Hopefully your computer labs don't look like this, but that's the picture that comes to mind when I hear that definition. Next slide. So this definition is just a little too broad, too bland for our tastes. This could mean anything from the previous image to kiosks in a public library or even at a bus terminal. Let's try to get to something a little more specific for our definition. Next slide. So this is a bit of a better definition, thanks to the Missouri University of Science and Technology. I like their definition. At least 2 similar computers located in an area primarily used by many students to complete coursework. And I apologize for reading that verbatim, but it's important. There's some key concepts there, and let's move on to the next slide. Advance. So computers are going to be in a computer lab. That's pretty obvious. And the reason that we have plural computers, it emphasizes the redundant systems, the redundant nature of the computer labs. You're not in an office. You don't have a single resource. Since the beginning of mainframe computing and you had time sharing, we had to have redundant systems built in because there's just too many people trying to use one resource. Advance, please. Software, of course, you've got the software. And let's just advance twice, Beth. And shared by many users means that if you have 13,000 undergraduate students, you don't have 13,000 computer seats. I mean, that's a given. That's obvious to us. But some people do. That's called a laptop program if you actually have that many seats. But even if you have that many computer seats, you wouldn't have that many printers. You wouldn't have that many scanners, chairs, trash cans, air conditioning units, and all that. It's just the point is that this is a scarce resource, and it's shared by many people. That's the philosophy of what a general computing resource is. Next slide. When you think of the term lab, it doesn't really evoke what we now have. Computer labs can include all these things and more. And the classrooms, the meeting rooms, video conference. We even have sports tournaments in the form of a mouse pad discus. I don't know about you guys, but we're pretty good at it. I like to show this picture of a lab because it's a little bit of everything that's listed to the left. And you can see that there's a meeting space, there's general computing space, printers, and all that. Next slide. So given all that, I've worked up an expanded definition. A computer lab, and you can read this, it's a space whose primary purpose is to support the instructional use. And I emphasize instructional use. And it's equipped with appropriate computing technology. That's an expanded definition that we can use to encompass all of the different roles of the computer labs that I'm going to talk about. Next slide. I have a terminology that I use. I use roles and types to describe the computer labs. The roles themselves are, the labs are given the roles by their users, sometimes consciously and sometimes not. But the way in which a user's evolve to use the computer labs can really guide what role or roles it takes on. With roles, you can have multiple, and they, what they do is they deliver services that are driven by a purpose to meet a specific need. Advance. Now, oops, I think you advanced too far. Can we go back?
Yes, we can.
Possibly. Excuse me a minute. Nope, that's correct. We're perfect. So the types, on the other hand, that's on the right. The sponsors of a computer lab are generally the administration, but sometimes the instructors of the department. Now the instructors are tricky because they can be both the users and the sponsors. So you have to take into account both roles for them. But this physical space, that's a constraint that we have. And with the layout of the computer labs, that's another constraint. Oftentimes we're remodeling and we don't have a whole lot of choice in the layout. There's always a specific technology need that we're trying to address, and that it goes into the type of the computer lab. And a computer lab can only have one type as opposed to having multiple roles. I'll explain that further. Next slide. Now these are examples of roles. An individual work can mean study, homework, email, Facebook, that sort of thing. Group work is going to be group project work, team meetings, even electronic conferencing like this. Direct instruction, we've got lecture. You're all familiar with that. You've got hands-on instruction where there's a TA perhaps walking around to help each person go through the steps that they need to do. There's tutoring, one-on-one tutoring, and even video delivery in instruction. We sometimes use that. As far as the limited use, we're talking about scarce and shared resources like printers, scanners, and specialized software. Next slide. Typically, the types of the computer lab break down into these three types. You can almost always categorize a computer lab into one of these three. There's a general purpose lab, which we're all familiar with, a technology suite, and a computer classroom. And I'll talk about each of these in more detail. These are the three big types. Next slide. The types that we use here, we have broken these down a little bit further. We've got the first three. We also have something called a design studio, which is for more collaborative functions. A studio classroom, which is a hybrid space between a computer classroom and a design studio. And the typical meeting rooms, you can't quite get away from those. And of course, the virtual computer lab, which is becoming much more popular. Next slide. This is where I'm going to go into a little bit of detail, so if anybody has any questions about the overview, please raise your hand now. But this is the detail part of the general purpose computer lab. I mean, this is the most common computer lab. You can see in the picture, this is kind of the typical thing. And chances are most of you have these, or at least most of these are your general computer labs. You'll see these in K-12 education. In higher education, you might see some breakaway from this, but even at many colleges, you still see only general purpose computer labs. And the key characteristics are that it's optimized for the maximum number of seats. You're trying to cram as many users and computers into one space as possible. It does have, it's pretty flexible, but it can't be reserved for a specific purpose generally. At least we don't. Another characteristic is that usually you have IT in the room or they're nearby so that they can quickly help users out. Next slide. There's pros and cons to this approach. I mean, it's not very complex. Anybody can set this up without really thinking about it, and you can remodel any space to use that. And it does maximize the number of seats, which should please the computer scientists in the room. But it also is not very flexible. It has limited opportunities for group work, collaboration, and any kind of teacher-student interaction. Next slide. A technology suite, and this is one of those archetypes. Sometimes people call them media studio. You may have some of these. They're typically for specialized equipment and software and even specialized curriculum support. They've got high-end workstations. Students do advanced work. You won't see your freshman classes that have several hundred students in them using these labs because they're so specialized. It's advanced work, usually audio, video, that kind of stuff. We have made a conscious effort to incorporate this functionality throughout our labs so we don't have these separate spaces. Next slide. And the computer classroom. People call them different things. Electronic classrooms, smart classrooms, they're all the same thing. The basic characteristics are that there's a computer at each desk. So the student can follow along with what the instructor is talking about, or Facebook, as the case may be. But the instructors are leading the presentation. The students are following along. It's good for real-time interaction and learning. The instructors like them, but even our students have demanded more of these and actually ponied up student fees to pay for more of these, which is interesting. We've had computer classrooms since the 80s with mainframe terminals and Unix workstations at first. But in 1999, we created our first desktop computer-based classroom. As of 2011, last year, we had 5 with 30 or more seats each, and we have 2 more planned for next year. Next slide. This is the design studio, and the history of this is that we visited Lockheed Martin and we adapted their design of a design studio for their engineers. Like I said, we're an engineering college, so our workflow closely matches that, but I think this can be a standard for any group of students that is of a collaborative nature. We have 11 of these total, 6 in one big room and 4 in another big room. It's a very interactive, very collaborative environment. And the key characteristics, there's 6 computers. You can have more or less, but 6 computers is a nice number around the periphery of the studio with a conference table in the middle. This allows the students to come together to work on things and then to break out to the sides to work on their own individual work to support the group collaboration. There's always a projector, and we have smartboards, interactive whiteboards in there, so they can quickly do group work all together. Next slide. Key advantages of these things is that they're versatile. There's no special setup between groups. You can just let them be, and the students themselves can come in. The users can come in, and it's ready for whatever they need to do in there. It's modular. I mean, you can. This picture shows one of our large design studio labs, and there are 6 design studios in this lab, and we can rearrange the studios themselves to fit whatever space that we have. Very helpful that way. By dual concurrent use, that means you could actually have a group meeting at the conference table and individuals working around the computer if nobody's reserved that particular studio. It's more efficient that way. But it's not very space efficient. There's a lot of wasted space if you're looking to maximize the number of seats. But what we do is we have these available for reservation for any group. Not just instructors reserve the spaces, but student groups, study groups, senior design groups. They come in and they use the heck out of these spaces, and they reserve them so they know they're available for their group work. Next slide. This shows the overall layout of the space that we just saw a picture for. The larger area has the 6 design studios within one room. They're fabric partitions that separate them. There's a little breakout on the circle there. You can see how the setup works. The 6 computers, the conference table, the projector, and the board. Of course, there's printers located centrally in that area, and there's even a little help desk towards the bottom. On the right, that's an example of one of our smaller studio classrooms, and I'll get to that in a moment. Next slide. The studio classroom is a specialized hybrid of the electronic classroom and the design studio. There's more computers, so it's bigger than a design studio but smaller than a classroom. That's the idea. We have 2 of these, and one's a small one, one's a big one. This is a picture of the bigger one. And the picture here seats 21 students. And we have 20 computers in the room plus the instructor computer. There's a smartboard at the front, and there's also additional whiteboard space. This one happens to be a multi-purpose room, and the 2 rear-facing projectors you see in the picture allow for video conferencing. There's rear projection space. So it can be a very flexible space. It's great for smaller classes, especially graduate-level classes, or lab sections where you have smaller amounts. Large study groups use this all the time. Next slide. You can't quite get away from meeting rooms and lounges as much as we've tried to. But these tend to be grouped within the computer labs, even though they don't tend to have featured computers as their primary thing. They're a space. But they're served by the same staff for us because they're located within the lab spaces. So if you have a computer, you see there's a flip-up computer in the table there for the projector that's not viewable in the picture. But it has the same type of computers, the same desktop experience. The same type of projectors, so that the users who are comfortable with the lab's environment can go in there, and it's just an extension of the lab. Next slide. The thing about the meeting rooms and lounges is that they're a nice transitional space. They're a quiet space in the midst of a busy lab and sometimes noisy lab. You can go into these spaces. It's a great transitional environment from going from out of the lab into the lab and meeting with people, getting people oriented. We do see a reduced need for these. Because we've integrated many of these functions within our computer lab spaces, we've whittled them down to one lounge type area which has computers in it and 2 meeting rooms. Next slide. This is an example of one of our multi-purpose computer labs. It's called the Internet Cafe. And it serves several roles. It can be a general computer lab. You see that it has a computer workbench along the top edge, and along the bottom edge there's a curved bar where people sit at bar stools and use computers there. There's also tables in the middle and on the other side of the bar where people can sit. They can either do group work at those tables or do individual work there. I often see people bring in their laptops. 2 people at the tables use the computers, 2 people use laptops, and they do some group studying, homework, that sort of thing. We've also allowed people to reserve the entire space. It's great for a combined social and work arrangement. There's even a small conference room that could be reserved separately in the middle of it. So this is a great example of how we combine the different roles for the labs. Next slide. Virtual computer lab. Now, a lot of you have these, and these are becoming much more popular. It's simply defined, it's a computing resource that's connected via another computing resource. Now, the thing about a virtual computer lab is you have to have some computing resource, whether it's a laptop or a desktop computer or an iPad, to get to the virtual computer lab. But ours is Citrix-based. It's actually a load-balanced form of physical servers, so we call it the virtual lab. It's not really a virtual lab. To the user, they don't notice the difference. We've had this since 2002, before virtualization was really viable, and we called it Virtual Computer Lab at the time. It's evolving from its original use. Its original use was to support homework. That's it, for students at home. Now, faculty want to use it for distance learning. Students want to use it while they're in the classroom from their laptop. So we've had to adapt to that. Of course, it doesn't take up physical space, which is one very big advantage to it, and it supports a lot of the mobility that the students demand these days. Next slide. Before I talk about our support philosophy, I'll take questions about the physical spaces and the roles. No questions?
Well, Dan, this is Beth. So I just have a question. I'm curious how you got all this space. So, for example, at our institution, I might like to have more computer lab space available or more collaborative kind of lab space available, but there's no extra space to be had. So I don't know how to go about getting that or implementing that kind of environment.
That's really great. Great question. And what we've done is we have a growth plan within the college, and part of that growth plan addresses the number of students and the needs of the students. Also, we have a very high student technology fee, which gives the students themselves some lobbying power. They say, we have $100,000 in student tech fees, and we want to create a new computer lab, and we'll buy all the technology. You just give us the space. That's a really good partnership, and so we're usually not very. We definitely have space constraints, and just like everybody else, we're very constrained that way. But our college does have a vision that recognizes the need for these computer lab spaces. Does that answer your question?
It does. And just one quick follow-up. How many people do you have supporting all these different types of labs?
That's an excellent question. Yeah. Yeah, I actually have that in another slide, but I can talk about it now. We actually have 1/2 of FTE staff and about 10 part-time student employees to support 400 computer seats and 20 labs.
Great. And Dan, Rob Arms has a question. Rob, I've just unmuted you.
Okay, I thought it would be read because I typed it in. I wondered who is allowed to reserve the labs. you had mentioned that the labs could be reserved. I wondered if that could only be done by faculty, by students, or if there were some rules associated with who can do the reservations for them.
Hi, Rob. Excellent question. We have a homegrown online reservation system. It's totally self-service, and we don't approve anything. It's first come, first serve. Any engineering user, any of our students, our faculty, or our staff can reserve any of the lab spaces at any time for any reason. We don't judge. We don't really do anything. We have had to do some arbitration, and of course classes have first priority. Now the way that we work that is we make sure that all of the classes that need to use the computer classrooms are scheduled far ahead of time, and we work with the departments to make sure that that happens. But otherwise, if an instructor needs to do an open study session, they'll just do it themselves. TAs often do that, and the students themselves frequently reserve the lab spaces.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I would have a feeling here we'd run out of that space quickly. I think it would be reserved rather frequently by our students.
And it is, and we do have some rules in place. Of course, the online reservation system helps mitigate people just reserving a space. We have had people try to reserve a space from 12 to 5 just in case they need it from Monday through Friday. That obviously doesn't fly, and there are some safeguards in place with the automated reservation system to prevent that. And we do spot check that. And of course, if anybody complains to us that one group has taken up more than their fair share, then we do arbitrate. It does work pretty well, and we have had enough spaces to go around that it usually does work. But you're right, the students do tend to just reserve whatever they can and use up whatever they can. So it does take a little bit of management of that, but all in all, it goes pretty smoothly.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
You bet.
Dan, we do have another question from Sherry. Sherry, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? I've unmuted you. All right, just in case Sherry can't. So Sherry's wondering, how do you balance specialized software across spaces where licensing restricts the installation to a particular department or area?
Sherry, great question. We have a lot of that we have to use. So part of that is managed at a different level. We actually go around, because we have 5 departments within the engineering college, and I understand that at a university level there would be a lot more stakeholders with that sort of thing. In the past, we have used software like KeyServer to manage who can access particular software packages that are installed in the labs. At this point, we don't, because we work really hard to make a cooperative purchase between the departments. We use concurrent network licenses almost everywhere we possibly can, so that if you want to buy 50 concurrent licenses, only 50 users can use them at a time. The software is actually installed on all of the lab computers, and that's a big part of our philosophy, is we install every piece of software on every lab computer, so that there's no such thing as a GIS lab. You can use your GIS software in any lab. You don't have to go to a specific space to reserve it. And if there become problems with that scarce resource of the software being used up, we put other controls like KeyServer in place to manage that.
Dan, Jean would like to know, how are your labs being monitored?
We have a very funny sign that hangs above one of the labs, and it says "You are being monitored," and it has a picture of a person throwing a monitor. That's about it. We do spot check with the small amount of staff that we have. We are based in the labs, with the exception of myself. The student employees that work for me, their office is the lab, so they are in there all the time, and they have to constantly go to different labs to look at that. But I'll go ahead and talk about our support philosophy a little bit, because that answers this question. One of our guiding philosophies is user self-sufficiency. So we have a lot of seminars, and I go speak with the freshman classes. We have ongoing computing seminars with our students to help them know what they have and help them use the computing technology in the computer labs. That can be a course in itself, just knowing how to use the technology that's available. And so we provide a lot of self-paced resources like our website, and we have a lot of documentation. We can't sit down with every person, obviously, and help them use the technology, but we do allow people to just come in and sit down and use it, and a lot of that is in the design, the desktop environment of the lab itself. It should be straightforward on its use, and it generally is. We have very few questions about what is this device, and of course there's the documentation I talked about in our trainings, and we try to maximize hitting the mass number of people as possible. Forget email; they don't read email, but we try to hit them up when they're forced to, and we work with instructors in freshman classes to come in and do our little lectures. But as far as the staff, covering the labs, we wait for the users to report problems. Now we are as proactive as possible, and I do employ people who specifically go around, check the printers to make sure they're full of paper, check the projectors to make sure they're working, check everything to make sure it's working properly, look and see if anybody has unplugged a monitor. But for the most part, we have our users let us know when there's a problem. So
we do have one other question.
Yes.
That came in from Matt. Matt's wondering, do you locally install every piece of software to the local machine, or do you utilize any application delivery or remote access to run software? And then the second part of that question is, if everything is locally installed on the workstation, what do you use to manage those images, and how do you keep the images from getting so large they become difficult to manage?
That's a great question. I'm gonna let's skip to the next slide, and we can talk about that, the way that we manage the technology in the labs. So we have half and half computers in the labs. We have half thin clients and half workstations. Now, what I'm talking about when I say a workstation, we're talking a PC on steroids. We're not talking about the $399 deal of the day Dell. Those do not go in our labs. We specifically spec the internal components of our workstations and spend a very long time working on that. We are an engineering college, and so we have to worry about that sort of stuff. Now the thin clients are more general purpose, and they can cover more ground. Now the software is that every piece of software is installed everywhere, including the thin clients, including the physical PCs, including the virtual lab. It's all there as much as licensing can allow us to. So we only have to worry about 200 computers for the desktop image. We do create a standard desktop image, and we install every piece of software on there. It is a bloated image, I will give you that. It has to be everything to everyone. We've experimented with different ways of delivering that, and that has been the best way that works for us. We are currently using Windows Deployment Services to manage our computer lab image delivery. We also supplement that with a little bit of application provision from Citrix. For example, we have what we call a legacy farm for legacy applications. We've moved to Windows 7 last year. There are still a few applications that only run on XP. So we actually use Citrix to publish applications that are old on an as-needed basis. Students just log in from the lab desktop, and it's published to the start menu in there. We can also rapidly deploy applications in that same manner. I'm sure none of you have had the situation happen where a professor comes to you the day before an assignment, the student says, I need this software installed throughout the labs. But we have that situation, and we can accommodate that through the use of published applications through our Citrix technology on what we call our rapid farm. So we also have, for our computers, along with the thin clients, the workstations, we have a very few projection PCs, which they're only there at a smart lectern in the case where we have to provide a specialized software to run certain hardware like the interactive whiteboards. But for the most part, we have workstations or thin clients. Our spaces are mobile friendly. Like I said, we have Wi-Fi everywhere. In our classrooms, we put little power outlets on the desk so people can plug in their laptops or other devices, and they can supplement with the virtual lab from their own device. Beth, I think I answered the questions that Matt had. Is that right?
I think so, and Matt
Okay.
hasn't typed in anything else. So Matt, if you have additional questions, just type it in.
Okay. And another quick note: we have printers, and you have to have them. What we have done is we spread them out in every lab. We don't have one place you go to print. We have printers everywhere, and it costs a lot, but the students want it. They manage a lot of their own technology fees, and they want the printers. We have a print quota system, so there's not a lot of wasted paper from there. We also have large format plotters, and again with our self-service philosophy, those are open plotters. Now they cost a lot of print quota when you print to them, and we have plaster them with signs that say, please make an appointment with one of our lab technicians so we can show you how to do it. We have self-service guides on our website too. Also the printers, I should note, are monitored centrally from HP WebJet Admin. So if one of them needs paper, it sends an email, blasts an email to all our staff, and whoever's closest just goes and fills it with paper. But like I said, we also have students who go around, and that's their job, is to monitor those things. Let's go
Dan,
to
what print management tool are you using?
HP WebJet Admin for monitoring the printers. For the print quota system, we use PaperCut.
Yes. Oh, PaperCut. And then what is your printing quota? Jean is wondering.
It's $21 per year, and that works out to about 1,200 black and white pages per year per student. And again,
Great,
their technology fees do pay for that. So let's go to the next slide. Speaking of technology, we have a couple of unique features. We have these scanning stations, and they come in two parts. On the right, you see a large flatbed scanner, and it's hooked up to a Mac Mini. That's the only Macs you'll ever see in our labs, by the way. It's not that we hate Macs, it's only that 4% of engineering software runs on Mac OS. But as you can see, that one's actually running Windows anyway. What we've discovered is that we used to sprinkle scanners throughout the labs, but people would park on those lab computers for hours, and nobody would be able to just come in and do a quick scan. So we just put in a scanning station that the computer is not networked, so it's not useful for anything besides scanning and using Photoshop. And we tell people, bring in your USB drive, plug it in, scan, and be on your merry way. That has worked great. We only have 3 of those flatbed scanners throughout all of our labs, and that more than covers the load that we have. On the left, we use these HP digital sending devices. These are networked scanning devices, high-speed, high-quality scanning devices for usually 8.5 by 11 is the best use of those. But because we have thin clients so prevalent, we can't hook up scanners to thin clients. It's just a limitation of that technology. So we put these in those places, and the students love these. In fact, they've gone so far as to scan textbooks and don't tell our bookstore. But they love to just scan in their homework. They scan notes and share them with each other. A network scanner is pretty essential. And that's another resource that people can just walk right up to, look at the sheet next to it, see the instructions on use, and away they go. Next slide. Just quickly about our visual technology. We have a lot of it. We have smart boards, like I talked about, the interactive whiteboards. We use the smart boards. We have them in 15 of our labs. The instructors love them. The students love them. They love to use them when they're doing collaborative work or doing presentations amongst themselves. And we like to give people choices with the projection systems. We really pack our smart lecterns in the electronic classrooms full of technology. Kind of ridiculous. We have, in most of them, we have 3 options. You can use a thin client, which has all the software. You can use a PC to control the smartboard, or you can use your own laptop. And then, of course, we have other projection sources even above and beyond those. It can increase the complexity a bit. So we have to have a detailed instruction sheet placed on each lectern as to what each button does. But for the most part, our users pick it up pretty well. But we have a lot of our distance ed support has been ramping up. That's been a really hot topic for us, is distance ed. And so we have recording cameras in the room. We have recording hardware. Sometimes we just use software to record with. But these rooms can also double as video conferencing rooms. We use an open source video conferencing system called AccessGrid. And everything is, all the audiovisual technology in a classroom is routed through the lectern in front, so people can just push a few buttons and do whatever they want. Some of our even smaller classrooms, the 30-seat classrooms, have 3 projectors because instructors want to be able to show 3 different things at once in the front. Next slide. Before I go on to challenges, are there any other questions about our technology? Okay. Beth, how are we doing on time?
Great, 3:42.
Okay. So I want to talk about our challenges because everybody has them. Funding is one of the biggest ones, and of course everybody has these challenges too. I know there's very few universities that are fully funded for whatever they want to do technology-wise. Of course, on the left you have this is what people like to fund. Either through the students love to throw more student fees to get more computers and bigger monitors, that sort of thing. We have donors like one of our donors is Lockheed Martin, for example. They love to donate and give us computers. We have in-kind donors, HP, that will give us computers. Nobody wants to donate to buy new tables or chairs. Nobody wants to buy new carpet. That's a tricky thing because many of our funding sources by charter, such as our student technology fees, we are not allowed to use most of it towards the infrastructure. And our home departments, our college, they are not able to provide those resources. So that is always a challenge to get creative funding. We often have to go with partnerships or sponsors. We've named a couple of labs after people so that we can get infrastructure improvements. But these are things that we're constantly struggling with. The only thing I can offer there is just get creative. We have a surplus department. We often raid for our tables, and I employ a student handyman to fix things up and makes things look nice, just to keep things going longer. And it's always a fun discussion to see how we can creatively fund these kind of things.
Dan, for a point of clarification, can I just ask, so are your computers and monitors like in a renewal program, or
yes.
And then you get additional funding for new initiatives?
That's correct. We have lifetime cycles on every piece of technology that goes into the labs. Computers, for example, are on a 4-year cycle. Monitors are on a 5-year cycle, and so on. And we have a standard budget through our student technology fees that replace those things on a cycle. But of course, if we get a big fancy piece of technology donated, then that may or may not be on a replacement cycle after that. But we have a very clear replacement cycle, and that helps a lot to have that. If you don't have that already, I strongly advise that. Even if you have a 10-year cycle on something, it helps. Does that answer your question, Beth?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Another challenge, we have some security issues. Now, we do have layers of physical security. Our labs, I should mention, are accessed with a swipe card from their student ID, and they are open 24/7. So any student can go into the labs, and we even have access to buildings after hours with their swipe card. Because we are not staffed 24/7, we have to, of course, lock things down. We have physical locks on everything. Security cables, layers of physical locks sometimes. We even lock the printers so that people can't get into the drawers and pull paper out. And of course, we log who goes into the rooms. We log who logs into the computers. We have security cameras in some places that are recording. So the layers of physical security help. Amazingly, we don't have hardly ever any theft. The students themselves are good at self-policing because these are pretty dedicated group of students. A lot of them, most of the labs, you will have somebody there at 3 a.m. So it's really hard for somebody to walk in and steal something or misuse something or break something without somebody else knowing and reporting it. Our students are awesome at reporting to us when something else happens.
Dan, Jean would like to know, how do you secure your printer trays?
We void the warranty of the printers. we drill through the plastic, and we actually mount some physical security cables with eye bolts in a couple different mount points to close them, and then we have locks that all of our lab assistants have keys for and can open them up to refill the paper. The pros and cons with that, of course, are that you have to be on top of filling paper because people can't fill it up themselves. But we did have a problem with people just pulling paper out of the printer to use for their own scratch paper or taking back to their dorms to use with their own printers. So we had to implement that. So as far as vandalism or breakage, we also have a little problem with that. We've had a couple of incidents in the past with vandalism. Breakage, it's beyond the normal wear and tear of keyboards and things like that. We really don't have a problem with that. But one of the biggest challenges that we have is students wanting to reconfigure things. Because we provide a flexible environment, they want to make it more flexible. They will sometimes try to rearrange computers and monitors. They will reroute cables if they're accessible. In our smart lecterns, especially, this is a problem. If we don't put plexiglass on the front and secured bolts in there, then people will, if they perceive a problem, even if it's not really a problem, if they perceive the problem is there, they're engineering students, so they want to go in and fix it, and they don't want to bother us, so they think they're fixing it. They're usually just troubleshooting, and they're not vandalizing or trying to break anything. But it doesn't always work out, and so one of the biggest things that I communicate with the students in particular is don't worry about bothering me. They say I didn't want to bother you. I say bother me, please bother me, and it's usually a simple, oh, you actually, for that functionality you use this configuration and you don't have to rewire stuff. So that is the funny thing, is that that's one of our biggest challenges, and it's people trying to fix stuff that they perceive as broken. So next slide. Another challenge is visiting faculty, because our faculty are very indoctrinated into our model of self-service and self-sufficiency. They are self-sufficient themselves in the labs for the most part, in the electronic classrooms. They understand our model, and they're used to working with it. And we do a lot of proactive training with our instructors in the classrooms. The problem is that when visiting faculty or instructors come, and we don't even necessarily know they're coming until they're there and they have a last-minute problem. The software is not installed that they expect to be installed, or they don't have a login, that sort of thing. Sometimes we just aren't staffed appropriately to meet that need, especially if there's an evening class outside of our working hours. And we aren't aware of the problem, we can't proactively address it, and that is a problem for us. Because these labs are open 24/7, they do schedule classes in there, and we can't always help people when they need it. So that is one of the challenges that we struggle with. Next slide. Now, a lot of people disallow food and drink in their computer labs, and that's a big controversial subject. I know that because I'm actually presenting a poster at this SIGUX about this very topic, a little more in detail. We had a no food and drink policy throughout our computer labs. It was the most enforced, most violated, most hated policy that we've ever had. It caused the most friction between our staff and our users. The problem was that we were too successful in providing an atmosphere that students wanted to be in for many hours at a time. As a victim of our own success, they just wanted to feel at home and bring in their food and drink. They're also pretty dedicated, and they'll be here for long times, and they naturally want meal breaks. They don't want to give up their computer seat. With our 24/7 labs and us not being here, it's impossible to enforce it equally across the board. So users felt victimized whenever they were approached to get rid of their food and drink. So as a result, next slide. In 2010, we abolished the policy of food and drink restrictions. We said food and drink is allowed everywhere, in any of our computer labs, in any of our electronic classrooms. It has been an amazing success. We've been so happy with this. Our users are so much happier. Our staff is happier. We have a better relationship with our users. This has been one of the most successful moves we made as far as lab policies. And none of the fears that we had have materialized, that we don't have a significant increase in breakage from food and drink, no more no significantly more broken keyboards or mice or anything else for that matter. And the students are very responsible and clean up after themselves. I have ramped up a little bit of my computer or my student labor to go around and actually clean things up. I actually have them go around and sanitize surfaces from time to time. But it's a service that we provide outside of the normal scope of services that you'd think of a computer lab, but that is so well received, and it really increases the students' productivity throughout the computer labs.
Dan, Rob's wondering, what happens if a user spills Coke on a PC and destroys it? Who pays, etc.?
First of all, we intentionally place the PCs in places where it's very unlikely that they're going to get something spilled on them. They're either placed as far back on the desk as possible, so nobody's usually putting things right on there. They might be cages underneath the desks, so they're sheltered from that sort of thing. And so we rarely ever see that problem. The worst that we've seen is that it's not like a laptop where if you spill it on the keyboard you can destroy the thing. If you spill it on the top of a computer, usually you're just making a mess on the case. If it happens to seep through the front panel of the case, then the worst case scenario is we replace the front panel or just the case itself, which is $50. So who pays? We have a computer replacement budget that we've always had. It comes out of the same source that we come out of. If our machine is out of warranty, then it comes out of that pool. Like I said, we have not had any significant increases in the cost of replacing broken equipment.
Another question from Matt. Does your campus housekeeping clean the labs or just the floors? How often do you have your staff spend time cleaning, sanitizing lab areas?
Really good question, Matt. Our custodial staff do clean the floors regularly, and as a matter of fact, before I initiated this policy, I worked very closely with our custodial staff and made sure that they were on board with it. I did not want to alienate them, and because I worked hard at that, I think they were very open to exploring this, and after checking in, after we implemented the policy, they were satisfied. It does create a few more trash cans, and we just worked with custodial to add a few more trash cans in there. But they actually found that because our student users are disposing of their trash appropriately, and our student employees go through and dispose of trash, and the custodial staff never cleaned up the surfaces of the desk. They would clean up things on the floor, and they really only cover the floors themselves. So I do employ staff, student staff, to go around and clean. It's wrapped in with other duties, so it's hard to say exactly how much, but I would say probably an extra 10 to 15 hours of student labor per week is sufficient to add to what we did before. Because like I said, we didn't enforce 24/7 because we weren't here. So we would come in the morning and there would be food trash left on some of the tables. So we'd have to clean those up anyway. So it's really not a significant difference.
And then Jean's wondering, how often do you get your keyboards and mice cleaned up?
That's part of what our student lab assistants do, is they actually, it's part in their job description to go around and clean off the keyboards and mice. We use just a disinfectant solution, and probably once a week per lab is when a keyboard and a mouse would get cleaned as they go through. And what I've also discovered is that if you buy in bulk replacement, keyboards and mice are cheap. So if they get nasty, I don't hesitate to throw them out and replace them.
Thank you.
Any more questions about that?
Not right now.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. And here's a little bit of where we're going. I'll quickly run through this. I know we're about out of time. But this pervasive computing term, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's also called ubiquitous computing. It's becoming much more popular these days. Essentially, it's computing that is invisible to the user and everywhere at the same time. A lot of people say, between portable desktop sessions, application publishing, virtualization, mobile devices, Wi-Fi everywhere, surely we're there. I don't think so. I think we're close, but not quite there. But this is something that we're becoming much more closer to. And you're going to see this in everyday aspects of your life, in every aspect of your life. The next generation of students have grown up with a smartphone in one hand and interactive screens always in front of them. They're going to expect this. They expect computing at any time without delay. The traditional desktop model is as antiquated to them as mainframe computing is to us. Our curricula are already adapting to this, and we need to follow suit. We have to adapt as well, and that's part of what we're constantly thinking about, is how we can accommodate this thing. Next slide. Along with that, mobile devices. Mobile devices aren't going away. A few years ago we thought, well, maybe we'll see how they work out and maybe they'll go away. They're gadgets. They're not gadgets anymore. They're getting more powerful. They're, for now, limited by a little bit by graphics capabilities. There's a bit of a productivity gap. Mobile devices are best for consuming content. Desktop computers are better for creating content, but that gap is closing fast, and you will see users needing to use mobile devices, and that could be incorporated into your lab's environment as much as possible. Next slide. We're very excited about our new facility we're building, and if you ever have the good fortune to have a new facility where you can plan computer lab space from the beginning, it's a wonderful feeling. And what's funny is that we started planning this in early 2011. The facility is scheduled to open in fall 2013, and already we're modifying our design based on evolving technology. And what our core concept here is building for infrastructure, building for flexibility in infrastructure. We don't know yet what kind of technology we'll be putting in there. We can guess, but we don't know what's going to happen in a year. So the roles that I talked about, they are spreading. We're going to see instructors wanting to have computer labs out in a main atrium, for example. So next slide. This is a hot topic for debate every time, and every time a few of us get together. And the fact that this question is still being asked makes me think, yes, there is a need for computer labs. We just have to reinvent what a computer lab is, and we have to be adaptable. With mobile devices, thin clients, virtual, you try to don't put all your eggs in one basket. Build for redundant system delivery, and they're all the same thing. That you're delivering services to the user, you're delivering computing services, and that's what the last point is about. You're looking at, you're not providing computers to users, you're providing computing, and that's a fundamental difference. But to the user, it's indistinguishable. Okay, next slide. And I know we are about out of time, but if there are any questions, I can take them. No questions. Fantastic.
We have one from Wes. Do you provide resources for the user who brings their own device, network access, printing, etc.?
Yes, mainly through our virtual lab at this point in the lab or classroom setting. Because it has all the software installed on there, they can print from those to any of our lab printers. We don't let them print from their laptops because of the print quota system. But we do have a web print feature which is available in the print quota system we use. So they could actually, in a few limited cases, they can print from their laptop, but they can't map the printers natively. They have to go through a web interface. We do provide some software that they can run on their own laptop. For the most part, we're limited by license agreements with the vendors as far as that goes, but when we can, we do provide that, and they connect to our license server through a VPN, and they can use it. But most users find that our devices are better than theirs for computing power.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so, oh, wait, nope, one more. When people bring in their own laptops, are you a VGA standard for projection?
Yes, that's a great question, because I've been looking at options for that. We still are a VGA standard because everything can be converted and downgraded to the analog signal that VGA has. With digital signals, it's a little tricky because you have some computers have HDMI and some have DisplayPort, so you can provide conversion options for them, but they're usually in the form of little dongles that get lost or misplaced or just go missing. But our universal standard is still VGA, at this point. I understand that needs evolve, the industry evolves, and we are looking for more of a digital standard. We also are looking at wireless projection options as well. So that's an evolving thing for us.
Great. Well, thank you. I want to thank everybody for attending this seminar. Hopefully it was recorded, and we will be able to put it up on the SIGOX website in order for you to refer to it at a later time and or share it with your colleagues. Yet that usually takes a few days for it to be available on that website. And just a final plug that our SIGOX annual conference is coming up soon, October 14th through 19th in Memphis, Tennessee. The early registration deadline is Monday the 17th. So if you haven't signed up yet, please do. Thanks so much. Our next webinar is next week by Lori Fox regarding the X factor and having a great presentation. So thank you, everyone.